Can any of you remember a time when there has been so much confusion in the public square?
I've been around for a while, and to me, I cannot remember any time quite like what we have gone through in the past week. I think right after Pearl Harbor was bombed, there was a lot of confusion, especially on the West Coast. Rumors were flying everywhere. People were worried the Japanese were going to invade the mainland, which anybody who thought about it for 5 minutes would know they wouldn't. But nevertheless, it scared everybody to death, and so the nation was in a lot of confusion. But then it didn't last very long because the country pulled together to meet the threat. And I thought it was impressive when you go back and look at the way they did. I don't recall anything quite like what we are going through right now. Borrowing a phrase from Isaiah, truth is fallen in the street. I suspect that some people, when they see that in Isaiah, take it as a reference to religious truth, but I don't. I really take it as an apt description of what we're seeing right now. I mean, where on earth would you go today for objective truth about what's happening out there? Somebody to just simply tell it like it is, A, B, C, D. We are, at the same time, facing an absolute blizzard of disinformation. And it's really astonishing to me. Some time ago, I read a remarkable book titled Explaining Hitler by Ron Rosenbaum. The reason I got the book was because I got an advertiser through the mail, and I was really kind of looking for something to read, and it advertised the book as a thumping good read. I don't know what thumping meant about it, but at least it impressed me enough to say, well, okay, I've always been kind of interested in this, and so I sent for it. Explaining Hitler by Ron Rosenbaum. I recommend it to you not merely because of the topic, because it's a really good read. You will not be bored. I've got 2 radio programs coming, just recorded, that cite that book extensively, and so you'll be hearing from me again on that subject on the air before very long. I think you would have to go back to Germany to the 1930s to find anything comparable to what we are seeing now in this country, because this just is not the way we have done things in this country. I have heard more than one commentator in the recent months, not me, but others, use the expression brown shirts, talking about some of the stuff that's going on out there. And I wonder how many of the younger generation have a clue what they are talking about. I really wonder. And for anyone who wants to wear a colored shirt for any party, I recommend that you look up on the internet the expression, the night of long knives. The night of long knives. The Germans were no different from us. They tend to believe what the government told them. Then those who opposed the government started disappearing. And for your information, the official name of the Night of Long Knives was Operation Hummingbird. Again, another lie. But still, the SA were Hitler's people pushing people around, in meetings and what have you, and picketing shops and keeping people from going into Jewish stores and breaking windows and doing all the rough stuff. The Night of Long Knives was the night he sent the SS and the Gestapo around to kill the entire leadership of the SA. So, this is the kind of thing that happens in that kind of an environment. Perhaps the least trustworthy source of news these days are forwarded emails. And I think, I'm getting to the place where I debate briefly. If there's one forward, I will probably open it. If it says forward, probably won't. If it says forward, I certainly will not. This is one of the ways where viruses are passed around, and invasions of people's computers is whenever they have some great interesting thing and people forward it to all their friends. The next thing you know, a lot of people's computers are infected by that. But frankly, you really need to check up on things before you forward them to anybody else. I don't just forward very much stuff, although I send a lot of links to things, but they're not forwards that somebody else has sent me, usually. And once or twice, I have sent things on that somebody sent me, only to find out later on that they simply weren't true. The thing that makes this thing worse is that the sources where you go to check up on these emails that come through are not trustworthy. You know, they have access to grind. They have their things they believe. They have ways of expressing stuff that when you look at them for a minute, you realize, oh no, this person is on this side. This person is on that side. And you just find that everybody is bending the truth to make it fit. I remember when I was a kid, we used to, one of our, this was pre-television days, one of our family pastimes was doing jigsaw puzzles. And my dad's favorite running joke was when he found a piece that looked like it would fit but wouldn't, he'd get out his little pocket knife and says, I'll cut this, I'll make it fit. Well, I'm afraid there's an awful lot of that going on in the public and the news media right now, today. I think the German Christians who kept silent all through the persecution of the Jews and then were cowed into silence whenever their own pastors got shipped off to concentration camps, and most of them died there. I think at first they were motivated by Paul's description of agape love. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. So that we see something happening and we say to ourselves, oh, I believe him. Oh, that can't be right. And, you know, you go ahead and you accept the explanation that's being handed to you because it's just not easy to admit to ourselves that somebody is lying to us. It's hard. And I think the German Christians, for a long time, were taken in by that. And then it was too late at a later time. Paul in another place cautioned us. He said, be you wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Christian people tend to be kind of the opposite sometimes. We're as wise as doves and harmless as serpents, but we really tend to be a little bit naive. Fact is, we really can't afford, living in the world we're living in right now, not to be realistic. The problem, though, is this. What is real, and how can we know it? That is the difficult question. So we turn back to our old friend Isaiah for answers to the questions like this. Isaiah 59 is one of my favorites. I keep coming back to it again and again. I don't know why it resonates in my memory and has for years. Isaiah 59, verse 14. Judgment is turned away backward. Justice stands a long way off. Truth is fallen in the streets, and equity cannot enter. The Hebrew word for equity basically is a word for balances. You know, something that's fair, balanced, and so forth. It can't get in the door. Yea, truth fails. And he that departs from evil makes himself a prey. You stand up and tell people the truth, they will, some sources will be all over you. How far back do we have to go to find examples of it? I bet you guys could give me some of them off the top of your head in recent memory. Open up, speak the truth, create a situation where the truth gets told, and they will be all over you. And that happens. Well, the Lord saw it, and it displeased him that there was no judgment. And he saw that there was no man, and he wondered that there was no intercessor. Therefore his own arm brought salvation to him, and his righteousness, it sustained him. No intercessor. Does that mean we have failed? Well, probably not us, because the fact is it takes someone with influence to make any kind of a real difference in the world. You can hold up your end of things wherever you happen to be, but because you aren't seen by God as an intercessor in society doesn't mean that you failed somehow. In reality, I think it is talking about office holders. In that day and time, he was talking about the priests and the princes in particular. People who were in a position to make a real difference in policy. And he said, I looked for them, and there was no one there. But look what happens when the office holders dare speak contrary to the conventional wisdom. They come in like a bunch of vultures and rip the flesh from their bones. They get butchered by the media, torn limb from limb, as it were. Now, it's fascinating how some writers in generations past, working on far less evidence than we have today, actually this kind of society. One of the most remarkable examples is George Orwell. Orwell was English, and he was worried about the advent of socialism in England, which right after World War II was coming on very strong. And he wrote 2 books, Animal Farm and 1984. These books I really recommend. I think it's a good time for us to go back and review these things, because the stuff that's happening now is stuff that George Orwell saw in England in 1945, saw it coming over the horizon, and now I think we are beginning to see the same sort of thing taking shape here right now. And we're not talking about a mere difference between economic systems. We're really talking about something very different from that on the part of the people who are trying to pull it off. And we'll just have to look, because that's the question. How do you know what is real? When you get emails coming into your box, when you can bounce all over the internet and find every side of every story, and people screaming at the top of their voice, people trying to intimidate other people, where do you go? And how do you know? My dominant impression is that the people in that day and time had come to believe a lie and to take it for the truth. Days like these were prophesied at different eras. And it's really fascinating when people read the Bible lots of times without a really good sense of history, without a really good idea of how things flowed. So consequently, you may not realize how different some of them are. Jeremiah, for example. Jeremiah was a prophet in Jerusalem in the days just before the city finally fell. We were a long way down the road when Jeremiah is there and Jeremiah is preaching. We have gone through the David and Solomon era. We've gone through Saul, the judges, Saul, David, Solomon, and then the divided kingdom following that. I forget really right now the length of time of the history of which Judah existed as a monarchy. The northern tribes, I think just a little over 200 years is how long they lasted as a separate entity before the Assyrians came in and took them out. But Jeremiah is at the bitter end of a long process. One day, God told him, Jeremiah 5, verse 1, "Run you to and fro in the streets of Jerusalem. See now, seek in the broad places thereof, if you can find a man, if there be any that executes judgment that seeks the truth, and I'll pardon it." Man, now I think this is a figure of speech. I don't think Jeremiah got out and run up and down the streets, but God is making his point. He says, you can get out and you can run up this street, down that street, go all the way through this city. I just want you to see if you can find a man in there who actually executes judgment and seeks the truth. Now notice, he didn't even say tells the truth. He said seeks the truth. And of course, we got to put ourselves into there and say, okay, am I a truth seeker or not? Do I really want to know the truth? Or do I have some axe of my own to grind? It's important to realize that. And though they say, the Lord lives, they swear falsely. In that day and age, it was like what happens in the courtroom here. You go into court, you hold up your right hand, you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Sit down and lie in your teeth. Happens commonly. Well, he said, this is the way it is. They swear falsely. O Lord, are not your eyes upon the truth? Jeremiah asks. You have stricken them. They have not grieved. You have consumed them, and they refuse to receive correction. They have made their faces harder than a rock. They have refused to learn. Then Jeremiah said, well, surely these are the poor. They are foolish. They don't know the way of the Lord and the judgment of God. I will get me to the great men, and I'll talk to them. For they know the way of the Lord, the judgment of their God. But no, he said, these have altogether broken the yoke and burst the bonds. Nobody, top to bottom. Now this is really a kind of a spooky thing to think about. Quite a long time before this, Hosea was up in Samaria, the city of Samaria, and the regions of the house of Israel, as opposed to the house of Judah in the south. And he had a message that he kept preaching. And I again and again, when I'm doing the radio program these days, I keep coming back to this 4th chapter of Hosea, because it is so powerful and so apt to our people who cannot learn the lesson of history, it seems, and who are bound and determined we're going to repeat it. Hosea 4, verse 1. Hear the word of the Lord, you Israelites, because the Lord has a charge to bring against you who live in the land. There is no faithfulness, no love, no acknowledgement of God in the land. There is only cursing, lying, and murder, stealing, and adultery. They break all bounds, and bloodshed follows on the heels of bloodshed. Ezekiel, in another place, in another time, said they break out, and the blood from this crime runs into the blood from that crime. It's just one crime after another. Because of this, the land mourns. All who live in it waste away. The beasts of the field, the birds of the air, the fish of the sea are dying. But let no man bring a charge, let no man accuse another, for your people are like those who bring charges against the priest. Now, to think about this, you need to understand, the priests were religious authorities. They were also in this society the religious authority. The civil authority. They were the county health department. Whenever someone had what appeared to be a breaking out of leprosy in his skin, he had to be taken to the priest. The priest had to examine him to decide whether he should be kept apart or not. Same thing true of a house. So these were men who not only had to do with teaching the law, they also had to do with enforcement in that day of time. So, but you people will go to court at the drop of a hat. You bring charges against anybody for anything. You stumble day and night, and the prophets stumble with you. So I'm going to destroy your mother. My people are destroyed from a lack of knowledge. Because you have rejected knowledge, I also reject you as my priests. Because you have ignored the law of your God, I will ignore your children. And then comes this line, which is just devastating. The more the priests increased, the more they sinned against me. The way it's worded in the King James even seems more pointed to us as a people when it says, as they were increased, so they sinned. There was by increase, he means becoming wealthy. And I think this is just as true today in our political class as it was back then in the priestly class. They exchange their glory for something disgraceful. They feed on the sins of my people and relish their wickedness. And it will be like priests, like people. I will punish both of them for their ways and repay them for their deeds. They will eat, but they won't have enough. They will engage in prostitution, but they will not increase. Won't be any kids. They have deserted the Lord to give themselves to prostitution, to old wine and new, which takes away the understanding. Bunch of drunks, having sex, committing prostitution, the whole thing. And you know, when he starts out with this, he lists three big things. Cursing, lying, and murder as the opposites of what he expects of people. And we are a land where blood is flowing and people are killing people as a routine matter, but probably the dominant two sins that we see around us every day are lying and adultery. Then there is Isaiah, who prophesied years before Jeremiah and just after Hosea, sort of in the saddle between these two, as it were. I want us to look at Isaiah 59, where the original quote I gave you came from, for what we can learn about it, because I still have not answered the question I asked you earlier. What is real, and how can we know it? Isaiah 59, verse 1. Surely the arm of the Lord is not too short to save. Surely his ear is not too dull to hear. But your iniquities have separated you from your God, and your sins have hid his face from you, so that he will not hear. Not that he can't. He has made a decision based upon the way you're living your life that he won't listen to you. Your hands are stained with blood, your fingers with guilt, your lips have spoken lies, and your tongue muttered things. Lies, lies, lies. They just comes again and again and again. And here we are, right here, right now, just feeling like we're in a crossfire of lies. No one calls for justice. No one pleads his case with integrity. They rely on empty arguments and speak lies. Now, I want you to think about this. We'll come back to that a little bit later, but I want you to think about this right here. They rely on empty arguments and speak lies. What do you hear on television today when the talking heads are coming and being brought in? I don't know what it's like on CNN. I got so bored with them I couldn't watch them anymore, but I watch Fox a lot. And they bring in talking heads, talking heads, talking heads, talking heads. What do you hear? You don't very often hear a full-bore argument about something. What you hear are empty words. You hear what are called talking points and political spin, which are slogans, they're one-liners, they're things they hope the evening news will pick up, and they're sound bites that will be played, and they don't have any substance behind them at all. Do you know how debates were done in the old days? It's, you watch these presidential debates or any other debates you see on television, which seemed to me, always used to feel like throwing something at the television set when I'd hear Hannity or Combs say, "We're going to debate this." I say, "No, you're not. All you're going to do is just jaw at one another," and sure enough, that's what we get for a while. Empty arguments. When you're going to do a debate, and I remember this from college days because I was on a debate team, we each got, there were two of us on the side. Each of the two pro guys got 10 minutes. Each of the two con guys got 10 minutes. Then each of the two pro guys got 5-minute rebuttals. The other two got 5-minute rebuttals. There you can make an argument. There you can make a point. There you can support your point, and you're not interrupted. Nobody's saying things while speaking while you're talking. You have the floor. You can talk. But you have to remember when you're making that talk that the other guy is going to get up in a few minutes and take your argument apart. What does it make you do? It makes you work hard on what you're saying, that you don't leave him any place to get leverage. You don't give him a slot to get a screwdriver in so he can pry the thing apart, because if you do, he will, unless you happen to be lucky enough to come up against inept opposition. Not only that, but in college debate, and I think high school is the same way, you have to be prepared to argue both sides. And you draw going into debate whether you're going to debate pro or whether you're going to debate con. That doesn't, at first blush to me, that didn't sound right. But after a little bit of experience, I began to realize that unless you have a case against, you have no case for. In other words, you don't understand the argument. Unless you can actually make the argument against your argument, you don't understand the situation well enough to even stand up and talk about it. As a result, somebody's going to take you apart. So, in preparation for our debates, we had a topic we talked about all year long, and we went back and forth on it both ways. I believed the same thing at the end of the year about it that I believed at the beginning of it, but I sure understood it a lot better when all was said and done. I would give a lot to hear some presidential debates like that, to where the men got up, gave their speech, and the other guy got up and disagreed and said what he had to say, and then he sat down and the other one rebuttal, back and forth, timed, so that they have to give a little time to answer questions and what have you, instead of letting the media sit out there, formulate the questions, and they do the job of finding out theoretically what these guys believe or practice or plan or anything else. And the presumption in all that is that the media, well, they're fair. That is the biggest lie that's ever been told to anybody, anytime, anywhere. Every media outlet in this country has a political bias. Your challenge, to figure out what it is, if you're going to listen to them at all, because if you don't, you're not going to understand what's happening out there. Okay. They rely on empty arguments. They speak lies, which is what sound bites and talking points and political spin are. They are lies. They conceive trouble and give birth to evil. They hatch the eggs of vipers. They spin a spider's web. Whoever eats their eggs will die, and when one is broken, an adder is hatched. They're cobwebs out there busy making. All these arguments they make, they're cobwebs. He said they're useless for clothing. They can't cover themselves with what they make. Their deeds are evil deeds, and acts of violence are in their hands. And I'm telling you something, if you listen to some of these debates on television, you are hearing nothing except cobwebs. They won't hold anything. They won't cover anything. And we really, as consumers of news and what have you, we need to be a whole lot more critical than most of us are. Their feet rush to sin. They are swift to shed innocent blood. Their thoughts are evil thoughts. Ruin and destruction mark their ways. The way of peace, they don't know. There is no justice in their paths. They have turned to crooked paths, crooked roads. No one who walks in them can ever know peace. You know, this is important. Lies drive out the truth, and justice follows truth out the door. The dominant lesson that came to me from this chapter is that the lying that becomes so strong destroys good judgment. And then your bad judgment leads to bad decisions, and everyone things just go from bad to worse. So justice is far from us. Righteousness does not reach us. We look for light, but all is darkness. For brightness, and we walk in deep shadows. Like the blind, we grope along the wall, feeling our way like men without eyes. At midday, we stumble as if it were twilight. Among the strong, we are like the dead. You know, that's what he's talking about here. This is all metaphor. But he's saying we're wandering around like men in the dark, and bumping into things and falling over things, even though it's bright light. We can't see. Why can't we see? Because we've been lied to, and because we believe the lies, and because we're not critical enough of what people tell us. We all growl like bears. We mourn like doves. We look for justice. We don't find it. For deliverance, long way off. For our offenses are many in your sight. Many in your sight. Our sins testify against us. Our offenses are ever with us. We acknowledge our iniquities. Rebellion and treachery against the Lord, turning our backs on our God, fomenting oppression and revolt, uttering lies our hearts have conceived. We just made them up, pure and simple. So, what's the result of all this? Justice is driven back. Righteousness stands at a distance. Truth has fallen the streets. This is where we started. Truth is nowhere to be found. And whoever shuns evil becomes a prey. The Lord looked and was displeased that there was no justice. Now, if you ever needed a good example of this idea that someone who shuns evil becomes a prey, just look at what happened to Governor Palin of Alaska. When she was announced as a presidential candidate, from that day forward, she has been like, a rabbit on the ground to eagles, birds of prey in the air. It's really staggering to see it. To me, as what I've watched what happens, it is rude, it is thoughtless, it is biased, it is nasty, and you ask yourself, whatever happened to journalism? Whatever happened to just tell a story? Whatever happened to just simply explain to people, just giving knowledge and understanding of events to people? That's gone. It's not to be found. He says this, justice is driven back, truth has fallen the streets, honesty cannot enter, truth is nowhere to be found. He saw that there was no one, verse 16. He was appalled that there was no one to intervene. So, he had to do it himself. He put on righteousness as his breastplate, and the helmet of salvation on his head. He put on the garments of vengeance, and wrapped himself in zeal as a cloak. According to what they have, so will he repay wrath to his enemies, retribution to his foes. He will repay the islands their due. From the west, men will fear the name of the Lord. From the rising of the sun, they will revere his glory. For he will come like a pent-up flood that the breath of the Lord drives along. Exactly the form this takes, we now know from history what happened to these people. I don't know what form it will take in the future, but I fear what he's talking about here does lie in our future. The Redeemer will come to Zion, to those in Jacob who repent of their sins, declares the Lord. As for me, this is my covenant with them. My spirit, who is on you, my words I have put in your mouth, will not depart from your mouth, or the mouth of your children, or the mouths of their descendants from this time further on. So, do we still have some things to learn about what is real and what is not? How to live in this environment, how to keep our heads on straight in this environment, how not to be swept away by this or that argument that someone is making. Jesus had some things to say about this. In Matthew 24, verse 4, the disciples had asked their question about, tell us, what's going to be the sign of your coming in the end of the world? And Jesus' first thing he said was, take heed that no man deceive you. And I'll tell you that this is a very apt warning, because I don't want to use the term gullible, but I do think we Christians are naive. I do not think we look hard enough at some of the things that we see coming by us on either side of the political spectrum. I'm very concerned about that. He said, they're going to tell you, oh, here's the Messiah. There are going to be false Christs that come in my name and deceive many. Here's the Messiah. There he is. Don't believe it. For false messiahs, false prophets will appear and produce great signs and omens to lead astray, if possible, the very elect. It's interesting. The King James translators, I don't know if they couldn't handle that quite like it was in the Greek or not. This is the New Revised Standard Version I'm reading. They do all this kind of thing to lead astray, were it possible, the King James seems to say, even the elect, which implies it's not. Actually, the Greek doesn't imply any such thing. He just simply says, to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. And if I read my Bible correctly, it seems evident to me that there are people who were good people, obedient people to God, believers in God, trying to be faithful to God, who were deceived on this or that point. So don't think that just because we are the elect, don't just think because we, quote, have the truth, end quote, that we are invulnerable. We aren't. Take note, he said, I've told you beforehand. So if they say to you, look, he's in the desert, don't go out there. Behold, he's in our inner rooms. Don't believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and flashes to the west, so will the coming of the Son of Man be. Wherever the corpse is, the vultures will gather together. Really a strange thing he's saying here, but it's plain what he's driving at. You're my disciples. You're not going to need anyone to tell you when I come back. You'll know. You can't miss it. Because where I am, that's where you're going to be. You don't have to worry. If you're not with me, I haven't come. Now, I think some Christians believe that because they have truth, or have the truth, that this kind of deception won't happen to them. Frankly, I think those people are just as vulnerable as anybody, and perhaps even more so, because they have not been internally forewarned and cautioned against what could come. Now, and again, they are wrong and in danger. 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. There's a really interesting passage here from Paul. I don't know whether I'd say he made a mistake in the first letter, but he kind of everybody in that era was thinking that Christ was coming in their lifetime. And the Thessalonians, because of the way Paul talked about the resurrection in his first letter, got kind of excited about the imminent return of Christ. He wrote back in chapter 2, verse 1 of 2 Thessalonians, second letter, now we beseech you, brethren, by the coming of our Lord Jesus Christ and our gathering together to him. I think he means concerning these things. That you be not soon shaken in mind, nor troubled, neither by spirit, nor by letter, nor by word, nor by letter, as from us. Which is, I think he's referring to his first letter. As that the day of Christ is at hand. Let no man deceive you by any means. Why warn them if it wasn't possible? Okay? There's no need to say, let no man deceive you, if it couldn't happen. Don't let anybody deceive you. That day will not come unless there is an apostasy first. And that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition, who opposes and exalts himself above all that is called God or worshipped, so that he, as God, sits in the temple of God, showing himself that he's God. Good grief. I don't know what he's talking about here, but it hadn't happened. It simply has not happened. Now, don't you remember when I was with you, I told you these things? And by the way, this individual cannot be Muslim. There is absolutely no way he could command any support from the Muslim world by claiming to be above God or claiming to be God and sitting in a temple. Wouldn't happen. Now, remember when I was there, I told you this. Now you know what holds back that he might be revealed in his time. For the mystery of iniquity is already at work. Basically, the word means lawless. The mystery of lawlessness is already at work. Only he who now lets will let until he be taken out of the way. What does that mean? I don't know. I've heard all kinds of different explanations. None of them are compelling to me. But I do think the Thessalonians knew precisely what he meant, because he just said, remember when I was there? I told you? He's making reference to that. Then shall that wicked be revealed, whom the Lord will consume with the spirit of his mouth and destroy with the brightness of his coming. Even him whose coming is after the work of Satan, with all power and signs and lying wonders. Think about it. Actually out there performing miracles and doing huge things. And probably with all kinds of testimony coming from people about all the stuff that he's done for them in their lives. Big time operator. And with all deceivableness of unrighteousness in them that perish, because they received not the love of the truth, that they might be saved. Now you would think that people who really love the truth, who cherish the truth, who deplore a lie, would exercise themselves to be able to understand and know the truth when they see it, and to reject the lie when they see that. For this cause, those people who did not receive the love of the truth, God will send them a strong delusion that they should believe a lie, that all might be damned who believed not the truth, but had pleasure in unrighteousness. Now, I don't think we are seeing this just yet. But I do think we are seeing an interesting illustration of how it might work. Now, you know, we're seeing things happen in this country right now that I never would have imagined would happen. Never would have imagined it. Yet here it is. How far will it go? What is it? I think it's a good illustration of how people can be led astray, how they can be led to believe a lie, how they will believe promises made by politicians, which, you know, I don't care what stripe the politician is, right, left, or sideways, believing promises by politicians is you're courting disaster. So back to my original question. In a generation of liars, how do you know what is real? Because that's just where we are. Okay, I've got some points here. Number one, do not assume that anything you read or hear is true, real, and factual. Look for the bias in the source, because it is there. Left or right or center. The bias is there. Don't just swallow stuff. Think about that bias. Number two, tune up your internal lie detector. How do you do that? Well, the first way you do it, the most important thing that you do to tune up your internal lie detector, is to make Bible reading a daily habit. That you don't let a day go by without a certain minimum that you set for yourself, that you actually sit down and read the Bible in the leather. Now, what do I mean by that? I mean you don't read it on your computer. You don't go chasing proof texts around through somebody's book. You actually take a bound Bible, find a quiet chair, find your bed, wherever you like to read, and read that thing starting in certain points and reading straight through. Not chasing around, reading in context, grasping what the author is saying, and going on day by day and immersing yourself in the Bible. Now, this is more important than you could ever imagine. Right here in Tyler not long ago, well, it's been a long time ago now, I went to a real estate seminar in which a local psychologist, I believe, he taught psychology, was doing a seminar for these real estate people. But he said one thing, I don't remember anything he said in this except this one thing. He said, everything that goes into your mind, no matter how it goes there, sense of touch, feel, smell, eyes, ears, whatever it is, everything that goes into your mind stays there forever. It's like a closet, he said, you can never clean out. And that's kind of scary in a way. So that when you read the Bible and you read it consistency, it's going in there and it will stay there forever. And there will come a day when you're going to face something, you're going to hear something, you're going to be up against a situation, and you will recall what you read in Scripture, and it will keep your foot out of the snare that you were about to put it in. I wish I could tell you how many times that's happened to me over the years. I can't remember all of them. But I just know how many times I've thought about to do something, and all of a sudden a proverb will come banging through my head and say, no, you don't do that. I keep warning myself occasionally about, in fact, just recently, somebody on our forum went what I thought was a step too far in criticizing President Obama. What came immediately to mind was what they said to Paul on that day. Do you going to speak evil of the high priest? And Paul says, I didn't know he was the high priest, for it is written, you shall not speak evil of the ruler of your people. Disagree with him? Yeah. Argue with him? Yeah. But you don't denigrate the man, for in doing so you denigrate the office, and in turn you denigrate God. Don't do that. Don't go there. Don't do name calling. If he's wrong, you can say so. But that's a different matter from some of the things that I have heard said about President Obama. I disagree with him personally. I think he's the wrong man for us at this time. But that doesn't mean I'm going to call him names or denigrate the office of the presidency. Number 3, consciously turn on your lie detector. You have one. Built in. Born in. You've been developing it ever since the day you were born. Your mind is set that way. It may be rusty, but it tends to tell you when something is not right. You read something and you... I remember one email came through to me the other day, and I read it, and I thought, this is very funny if it were true. It's outrageous if it were true. But I really don't think it is. Why did I think that? I don't know. It just didn't want to work. The lie detector has got to be turned on. You've got to ask yourself, you don't just see something that agrees with you. You don't just see something that says what you want to be said and assume that that's right. You've got to ask yourself, is it right? And only after you've asked it, is it right, and you've thought about it for a minute, then you can consider how to determine where it is. Our exercise, when we're looking at television, you can do this as an exercise. Don't look at the screen. Turn around, turn off the screen, but keep the sound on. And listen when the talking heads are discussing issues. And here's the game. How many sentences did you hear before you can tell the man's or woman's political persuasion? We have a game we sort of play. We'll listen for a minute. We'll say Republican. Listen a little further. Another one says Democrat. And you don't have any problem at all figuring that out. Now, why is that? Well, because most of the time they're using sound bites and talking points, and they're not talking in any depth. They're just using the thing they think people are getting used to hear. It's all slogans. Is about all you get anymore. Anyway, watch for and listen for talking points. I didn't know something. I where that came from, but apparently I heard yesterday on the radio someone talking this over and said this came from Dick Morris and Bill Clinton back whenever he was having all his troubles. They began to issue from the White House talking points to their group of people they had out there talking for them. And you could, if you listen to enough of them during the day, you could make up the list of talking points yourself. Rush Limbaugh has made that harder because Rush Limbaugh loves to collect all these from different voices across the Internet and then play them what he calls a montage. Just bing, 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 bing. And it's almost laughable. You begin to wonder, is anybody thinking anymore? Is anybody researching anymore? Do they think we won't notice? Well, there was a time when probably they'd been right in thinking that. We wouldn't have. But people like Rush, and he has a great fun with it, but it's also rather enlightening when you hear it. I mean, what are you going to do with that? I know Rush, you talk about bias. Rush has got plenty of that. But the bias that you hear in these linked up montage sound bites is very revealing, and it's true. It's true. And you can hear it yourself as it ticks off through there. In the main, talking points are lies. Some little white lies, some big black lies, but they're lies. So consequently, when you start hearing talking points, just know you're getting spin, which is another polite word for lie. 3, maintain a healthy skepticism. Now, this does not conflict with Paul's description of love. Believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. I think Paul is talking about personal relationships among brethren, not about politics. The old song, how can you tell a politician is lying? I presume all of you know the answer to that. If his lips are moving, right? Yeah. A healthy skepticism keeps a good grip on three little words. You remember the old song, Three Little Words? Cute song. The three little words were, I love you. These are the most important three words in the English language. But what I'm about to tell you are the second most important words in the English language, and they are, I don't know. I hear that once in a while. I don't know where they go to find these people on television who will say that. But I think they must search high and low and dig and what have you to find somebody who will go and say, I don't know. I hear this, I hear that, this is what it looks like, and kind of tell you the truth. Somebody who says, I don't know, is doing you a big favor. Beware of people who are too certain, too sure. It's dangerous. Frankly, I'm not nearly as sure of a lot of things today as I was 40 years ago, 60 years ago. I'm not going to go to 70 years ago. It was only 5, and that doesn't count. But, you know, you really have to think that, beware of that. We live in an uncertain world, and it's really important to keep that in mind. Because the problem is that once we say, oh, I know, if we happen to be wrong, the unlikely, far-out category that we just might be wrong, we'll miss it. Whereas the fellow says, I don't know. This fellow said this, another one said that. I think we should keep our eyes open to this. That guy's not going to get blindsided. It's the one who has decided too soon what he knows, when he doesn't really, gets in trouble. Number 4. When your internal thermostat tells you the debate is getting too hot, turn the debate off. Just stop listening to it, because you're not going to be getting anything worth listening to there. Now, I don't mean by this that you hide your head in the sand. Go looking for a different point of view. Try to gain some perspective. Here's a novel idea. Read a book. Now, people may grind axes in a book, just like they do on television, but they can't get very far without you figuring them out, really. And books are easy to check. You're looking along there and somebody makes a statement. You've got a footnote. Say, oh, you go looking at the footnote and you find a book and so forth. So I'm going to go down to the library and see if that's true. You can do it. You may even be able to find out, go up on the internet and do a search and find out whether it's true or whether it's not. But I've noticed this in Ann Coulter's books, that Ann Coulter will make these statements and then she will have footnote. She has voluminous footnotes. And the sources are there and the facts are there. So you get a chance. I mean, you may not like Ann. You may think Ann's a bomb thrower, and she is. You may think she's a satirist, and oh, yes, she is a satirist. But there was nothing funny about those chapters, particularly that chapter in her latest book about unwed mothers and their children and the handicaps that they're putting on these children by bringing them into the world with no father in the household. No throwing that aside. So go read a book. Check up on it. Take careful note of the news source you are reading. Ask yourself where this story fits on the political scale of right to left. You're reading a newspaper. As you're reading along, just ask yourself a question. Keep this little question always on. Is this person left, right, center, left of center, right of center? Where is this person on the political scale who is writing this story? I was reading one just the other day, and as I read down through, I thought it was just a very factual story, but I got about, half the way down the page, and I began to realize, no, this chap is a Democrat. There's no question about it. And if you just ask yourself the question, you'll know. And then you realize, I better take this with a grain of salt. Now I better look at the other side of the story. Now I better just put this on the shelf of things to be thought about later and not swallowed whole, because swallowing them whole can become very painful. It won't take you long to know how to take a given source. You know, if you're reading a newspaper and you see the little AP for Associated Press, and then you read down through the story, asking yourself as you go, where is this source on the political scale? And if you begin to see a pattern on AP or UPI or whatever news source it is, you will be far better served, because when you read them, it's not that you don't read them, you do read them. It's just that you know what the bias is going to be. That's how you keep your lie detector tuned up. Number 5, always remember the POGO principle. Everybody know what the POGO principle is? A line from one of Pogo's comic strips way back. I don't know how far away it was, but everybody knows it now. We have met the enemy, and he is us. We sit around pointing our fingers at the politicians, and really the problem in this country is us, all of us, not just you or me, not just this group or that group. The problem is that the whole country has allowed itself to go down this road and to be told these lies and to believe these lies because they want to. If it weren't that way, we wouldn't be where we are today. But that is the principle. One of the things I recommend to you in your reading is to read the 9th chapter of Daniel. Daniel, remember now, is recorded elsewhere in the Bible as being one of the 3 righteous men who lived. Just read what he wrote in the 9th chapter in that prayer to God that he made. It is one of those heartfelt prayers and very revealing about the way we ought to look at our society. And to give you a little help, Daniel didn't say Israel has sinned. He said we have sinned. He put himself right in there with them. He didn't claim anything else, and he just knew where the problem was. The problem wasn't the princes. The problem wasn't the false prophets. The problem was us. Because if we had not been of this mind, we wouldn't have believed a false prophet. So, if you think the leadership that we have is bad, go look in a mirror. Number 6, always call a lie by its name. Don't allow euphemisms. I mean, if it's a lie, it's a lie, and that's all there is to it. Talking points, they're just spin. And spin is just a lie by another name. It is not the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, right? So it's a lie. To me, calling it by its name, at least in your own mind, you don't have to say anything out loud. In your own mind, identify it for what it is. And this will help you not go down that road any further. That's 6. There ought to be a 7th. I'll tell you what, I will let you fill in number 7 for yourself. You'll remember it longer that way.